Pivot tables in Excel often have a reputation for being confusing, overwhelming, and, well, kinda intimidating, to the point it makes your head spin. But by the end of this video, all that's going to change because you'll learn how to confidently build them, and you'll even wonder why pivot tables scared you in the first place. All right, let's get into it. The whole idea behind a pivot table is you're going to create an arrangement or display of your data. Put another way, you're going to create a layout. Now, if that doesn't make sense, that's okay, because pivot tables are very hard to describe. It's only when you see them will you understand them. So stay with us. For example, here we have a list of our order data from our company, and some of the details we keep track of include the product category, the subcategory, which is a breakdown of the main category, the state, the geographic region the state falls into. This customer source is how the person found us through Facebook, web ads, newsletters, etc., and some numbers like expenses for the order, sales amount, profit made, etc. You can download a copy of the data if you want to follow along. In this video, I'll show you 2 ways to create pivot tables, and you can choose which method best fits your needs. But for now, to create your pivot table, click somewhere in your list, then click Insert, Pivot Table. In the dialog box, you have your choice of putting a pivot table on a new worksheet or existing. For today, let's accept the defaults and put our pivot table on a new worksheet. On the new worksheet, don't worry too much about this placeholder over here on the left. Rather focus on the right side of your screen. On the right, you have this little pane, and it has 2 sections. The upper portion contains all of the column labels from our list, otherwise known as fields. So we have our product category, subcategory, region, etc. And if we jump back to our list, we can see them listed right here. Let's go back to our pivot table sheet. And down here, we also have these 4 quadrants labeled rows, columns, values, and filter. All right, the way you build your pivot table is you take the field you want to display and drag it into one of these 4 quadrants. For example, let's say you want to see the sales amount for each subcategory. So we'll start by dragging the subcategory into the rows quadrant. When we let go, if you look over here on the left, Excel is showing us all of the unique or distinct subcategories from our list, with the information displayed vertically. Next, let's take the sales field and drag it into the values quadrant. This values quadrant is used to show calculations. What that means is, if we look over here on the left, you can see our subcategories now have a number next to them. How Excel arrived at that number is it went over to our list, found all the occurrences of an item. In this case, let's go with our blankets. Then it looked in the sales column, took all the individual sales amounts for the blankets, added them up, and displayed the total. So we can tell at a glance we sold approximately $5,700 worth of blankets. Excel then repeated the process for all the other subcategories. Okay, not too bad. Let's clear our pivot table and take things one step further. For our next example, let's say we want to see the sales for our product subcategory and region. We can start by dragging the subcategory into the rows quadrant, then drag the region to the columns quadrant, and the sales to the values quadrant. All right, so if we look at our pivot table, we can see that we sold roughly $1,900 worth of blankets in the Mid-Atlantic. The way Excel got this number is it went over to our list, found all the occurrences of the blankets in the Mid-Atlantic, then it took all the individual sales amounts, added them up, and showed us the total. It then repeated that process for all the other subcategories and regions. All right, not too bad. But why are these things even called pivot tables? Well, by definition, pivot means you rotate, swivel, twist, move around, etc. So all you do with pivot tables is pivot or rearrange your fields to create a different display. For example, we can pivot our data by taking the region field and moving it into the rows quadrant, then take the subcategory and move it into the columns quadrant. Now, if we look at our pivot table, you can see things look different, but here's the key. It's the same data, just arranged in a different way. And that's all pivot tables really are. Nothing but displays of data. All right, how about we take this one step further and drag the subcategory back into the rows quadrant, placing it below the region field. Looking at our pivot table, our data is displayed by the region first, then broken down by the subcategory. Same data, structured in a different way. Now conversely, we can drag the subcategory above the region, and that will arrange our data where the subcategory is listed first, then broken down by region. Moving on, let's talk about this filters quadrant. The filter lets you show only the specific items you want to see. If we drag our customer source, which is how the customer found our company, into the filters quadrant, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can click the drop arrow and show just the data for a specific source. For example, let's say we want to see just the people who found us through Facebook. To show all your data, click on the filter drop-down and choose all, then OK. If you ever want to remove a field from your pivot table, you can either uncheck it from the field list or drag it away from the pivot table. OK, continuing with our filtering theme, you can also filter directly within the pivot table itself. To do that, click on the drop arrow of the field you want to use, then uncheck Select All, then check the items you want displayed. But there's one more feature pertaining to filtering that's more widely used, and that's something called the slicer. Think of the slicer as being Filter 2.0 because it's just easier to use. From the Pivot Table Analyze tab, click on the slicer icon, then choose the field or fields you want to use. In this case, let's go with Customer Source. This box with buttons will appear, and to filter our data, just click on the buttons. As a bonus, if you hold your Control key down, you can then select multiple items. To clear out your filter, click on the funnel icon. If you want to get rid of the slicer, click on it and press your Delete key. Moving on, another big box office draw with pivot tables is your ability to change calculations. For example, if we start to build a pivot table and drag the sales field into the values quadrant, the default calculation will be the sum. However, you can change it by clicking on the field, then choose Value Field Settings. A dialog box will open, and you can see different types of calculations to choose from. How about we go with Average and click OK. Excel's now showing us the average of our display of data. Next, keep in mind if your data ever changes, you'll need to update your data by going to the Pivot Table Analyze tab and choose Refresh All. And there you go. That's Excel pivot tables in a nutshell. You've just learned one of Excel's most powerful data analytical tools. But before you go, earlier in the video, I mentioned there are several ways to create pivot tables, and I'd like to show you another method. This second method isn't necessary, but some people prefer it, while some companies may require you to do it. Here's how it works. What you want to do is take your list and convert it into an official Excel table by clicking somewhere inside your list, then click Insert Table or press Ctrl-T. In the dialog box, click OK. You've now created an official table. The way you can tell is by looking up here on the ribbon. If you see a Table Design tab, that tells you you're working with an official table. So what's the point of creating tables in the first place? Basically, creating a table helps Excel to read and understand your data more easily. After you create your table, everything else works the same. You can create your pivot table by choosing Insert, Pivot Table, then build it by dragging your fields into the quadrants like we showed you earlier. But if you really want to take a deep dive into pivot tables, check out this video. It's a recording of a 1-hour class dedicated to pivot tables.